It's nice to be back. Nice to see you again.
Always good to have you in Canada. I want to start with something you said a couple of days ago, and I'm wondering, as I was reading about it, I was thinking, when he said this, did he know it would take the world by storm this way, and is he thinking, stop overreacting? And it was the internet will wind up on 2 tracks, that there will be a Chinese version of the internet and a bunch of stuff that sits on top of it, and a non-Chinese, American one. Walk me through that.
So what I was really talking about was that there's an extraordinary set of companies being built in China. And I am struck by the scale of the Chinese internet opportunity, the new companies that are coming and so forth. And we have always assumed that the Chinese internet companies were sort of copycats and so forth. There's sort of a prejudice, if you will, that the tech industry's had for a long time. But that's no longer the case. And in particular, in electronic commerce, they are by far the leaders. And there are people who think that they're going to become one of the leaders in fintech because of the nature of how China is working. I think it's important to understand that innovation can occur anywhere, especially in Canada.
It has been, though, a matter of some debate for tech companies, including Google, about what you give up to enter that market. In Google's case, do you offer a censored version of your product for the Chinese market? How do you walk that line, given the opportunity you see there?
Well, in Google's case, we're going to make that decision based on the combination of our values and how we want to service the citizens of China better, the best. If you look, the world has shifted a great deal because of mobile devices. And I think the next great opportunities are going to be, what are the applications, what are people running on Android and on iPhones? And then, by the way, it's in that order. Just so we're clear.
It gets at, though, the responsibility of companies like Google to monitor their platform. You've been accused of bias by the President of the United States.
Which is false.
That's a biased response, but
no,
yes.
no, actually it isn't.
Fair enough.
I am actually a scientist, and the good news in Canada is people actually believe in science.
Yes, we do.
We do make mistakes, but not that one.
So how do you make sure, though, that your platform, Google is not obviously the offender that we worry most about at this moment in history. There are other platforms that are, we know, being manipulated. How do you make sure that it isn't, though? How do you make sure that it remains the unbiased provider of information?
Well, we've never said we were perfect. We've always said that we were the best at what we do, which is to rank. And ranking, by definition, involves a choice: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And our algorithms are getting smarter and smarter. And I want to take a minute to thank Canada, and I'm obviously a huge fan of your country, because much of the stuff was invented in Canada, right? All the interesting, deep learning research was actually developed here in Toronto and Montreal. And of course, we've hired some of the talent as a result, and they're here in Canada working for Google and Alphabet. So, as a general statement, we work really hard to address this. The algorithms are not perfect. We are constantly criticized on this stuff, but I think on a balanced basis, you'd say the algorithms are broadly representative of what people are interested in. They use the best ideas that we have for relevance, right? And they're very hard to spoof. And one of the claims I would make about Google is that compared to some of the other systems, ours is historically, and especially now, very hard to take down, right? It's, shall we say, resilient against attack from nation states and other people.
Which has kept you out of the negative fray a little bit in a way that...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'll give you an example that in our advertising system, we have a whitelist. So you have to sort of be a known entity. And that decision, which was made a long time ago, really helped us when random unknown things started to happen.
So you can safeguard against...
And that was not only did we do that, but that was one of the reasons why we did relatively well in the last few cycles.
One area I've been intrigued that Google has not been really drawn into in a negative way is the privacy issues, use of data. Because we know we've got this evidence, so we can point to Facebook letting people down. But Google owns more of our data than any company in the world and gets more of it all the time. How do you manage to stay out of that conversation?
We have the benefit of having been around now for 20 years, and we've had this particular concern literally from day one. And we understand that data that's sensitive to you is part of searches and so forth. So we worked really hard to protect it. And there's never been a major privacy breach in the company. The systems are cryptographically secure in a way that's very, very powerful, and I should not describe much more than that for obvious reasons. We think that our data is relatively safe from nation-state actors, especially after what happened with the various attempts by governments in the past. So we think that one of the best places to put your data from a safety perspective is, in fact, in Google.
Where inside Google is cybersecurity in sort of the list of ongoing concerns?
Well, it was much lower until 2010. And in 2010, there was evidence of a Chinese, perhaps state-sponsored, perhaps not, attack, which ultimately led to the actions that you referred to earlier. And at that time, Sergey decided to solve the problem, right? He sort of got, if you will, got mad, as in a technical sense of mad. And we built a team that has really secured the systems very strongly since. So now it's #1 priority. And I think we're very proud of that. So we understand the role that we now play of hosting the data of the world.
Your interest in China and the benign view of it comes at a time when we're seeing huge friction between the US and China. And China in some ways now appears to be the better actor on the global stage, taking over some of the kind of statesman-like roles that the US used to play. It's a very strange
that could be just a presidential transition away.
Fair enough. But you're stuck with this one for now. But how damaging is it? I mean, we've seen tech companies quaking because you have relationships there, you source components there, not you personally, but we see Apple, we see Microsoft, we see all of these companies very uncertain about what's going to happen if a real trade war persists.
Well, speaking as the son of an international economist, to me, trade wars are nothing more than tax increases that are specialized. And raising the prices of things is usually a pretty bad idea for economic growth. So I worry that we're sort of running into that at full scale, and I don't think that's such a good idea. We, Google, are much more affected by government policies and those sorts of things than we are about this area.
And on that front, we just had a couple of reports today from our innovation minister and Tobias Lutke put together a report on how Canada's doing. And part of that does focus on what governments should do to make this ecosystem thrive. What's your advice?
Well, so let's kind of tell the narrative as a guest of your country, what you guys have done right. You have strong universities. The government is small enough and sane enough that it actually helps the universities, right? And the industry is close enough to the universities that the hiring cycle works. And you have avoided some of the excesses of, for example, the American model, which is sort of higher and lower. The issue that you have to do now is you've got to create more software people, because software is everything. And if Canada is going to become a leader in the digital world, which it's sort of on its way, you need more of those kinds of people. And that means everywhere. It means that every university, companies need to fund it. We, Google, are funding all sorts of high school programs to help people get into the digital world. And I'm not necessarily saying computer science. I'm suggesting digital in a broad sense. So in biology, in mechanical things, in construction, and those sorts of things. It really is changing everything. I mean, here in Toronto, it's a great city, people complain about traffic. Well, we understand how to understand traffic much better through simulation and estimation, and eventually autonomous vehicles should allow for much higher utilization of roads. That's an example.
You are, in fact, engaged, Google is engaged with Sidewalk Labs to think about a smart city, to think about how we can live. There's been concern and pushback. Is that misplaced?
Well, I think so. I talked to the team today, and we have more meetings after our chat here. And you have an opportunity. Well, so first place, the land that somehow Toronto kept unused for about 100 years is glorious, right? It is, thank you for forgetting about it for 100 years. It's this gorgeous piece next to the lake that's clearly underutilized. And we are in the process, to give you the timeline, we're working on a master plan to be submitted to the city. There's a whole process of public discussion over the next 12 months. So everybody will have a chance to sort of weigh in. It's got a lot of ideas that are completely new. For example, one of the things that is most interesting is that they're going to try to increase the amount of timber that they use, because there's lots of timber in Canada, and it goes from there. Very, very digital and so forth. So to me, if we can actually build additional but what is the big problem in Toronto? It's housing. What is the big problem in Toronto? It's traffic. If we come up with solutions that you all are happy with and that your developers build and that your city manages, then I think that's a pretty big stepping stone. And for us, it's important, and we chose Canada because it's such a good partner. Once we can establish these memes, then others can copy these ideas. We don't even have to be part of it. We're just trying to advance the concepts of urban living. The numbers are interesting. 3/4 of the world's population will live in cities in 2035. Most of those cities are in Asia, and most of them are insufferably crowded for the reasons, and people who've traveled there, you know what I'm talking about. So if we can make a dent at that, that is a big deal for humans.
The fear, you've heard it expressed, is that a smart city is a data collection tool. Data is the new oil. Many of the people in this room will rely on data sets, and their product will only be as good as the availability of that data. Will they be buying it from you one day?
No. People somehow assume that Google is going to run the city. No, the city is going to be run by the city, right? And the data is part of the city.
So we don't need to be afraid of the data collection.
But more importantly, we wouldn't want to do that, because that would violate our notion of privacy.
One of the other things that often comes up in the conversation around the Canadian market, and I'm curious for your view, as somebody who both plays in it as part of it, but as also a global leader on this, we worry, some of us in Canada, worry about big tech that comes to Canada, locates here, takes our talent, takes our IP.
And keeps them here and hires more of them and makes money and pays taxes in Canada.
We get a few.
Is that what you were going to say?
That's definitely one side of the argument.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
You know the other side of the equation, which is that you are taking people, resources, capital from the startups that would be here and enriching an American corporation.
So, and yes, I've heard that argument. I just don't think it's supported by data. What happens when digital ecosystems thrive is there's opportunities for everybody. So, for example, my worry is here we are in Canada, you have such a strong ecosystem that our employees will be enticed by your startups out of our company.
We hope so.
So there.
We hope so.
You hope so?
Yes.
How is that okay? You see my point?
Yes.
And I'm being facetious. In the age of Twitter, you have to be clear when you're joking. So let me tell you the goal here is to build an extraordinary ecosystem that benefits the world using Canadian IP, talent, intellectual property, and so forth. How do you do that? You've got companies like Google Alphabet. By the way, this is the largest place outside of the US of Alphabet operations, right? In between DeepMind and Sidewalk Labs and a number of other activities. So we're clearly investing here. When that happens, right? Thank you.
It's partly because our engineers get paid less.
So we're clear. That's actually not true.
I've got data on that.
No, but you described intent. I know the intent.
Oh, I see.
You have a fact. I have intent.
Fair enough.
Right.
You win.
We actually don't discriminate based on income. We discriminate based on capability, which is why we are in Canada.
Because we're good.
So getting back to why Canada, if you look at the corridor between Toronto and Waterloo, right, and then you look at Montreal, and then there's 2 or 3 other innovation centers toward the west and clearly in Vancouver, you have what we need. It's sort of, Canada is big enough, if you will. There's enough people, there's enough schools, there's enough activity to really make this thing work. And so that's sort of step one. And you have the right culture and values and laws and all that kind of stuff. And a government that sort of gets it. When the ecosystem is working well, not only do you have companies of large scale thriving, you also have enormous investment in the buildings next door, in the startups that will compete with them, right? And so part of my objective, both here and in Europe, is to get real competitors to the big five, if you will. And you say, what an idiot. How could he possibly, representing his own company, say that? Because we're stronger when there's a local competitor. We, all of us, right? The ecosystem gets better. We work with them, right? So an example in an AI, I'll give you a stupid example, right, to make the point. We invented a platform called TensorFlow, which is by far the best AI platform. In fact, I know because it's the one that everyone uses. And when I say everyone, including our competitors, why do they use it? One, it's the best, and two, it's free. Okay. Why in the world would Google invent something that powerful and give it away? Because we benefit with the platform. That as a result of everybody using TensorFlow and all the universities and all that talent and all that Canadian talent, there will be enormous numbers of new applications that will somehow interoperate with our ecosystem, right, including competitors. And that's why the strategy works. So remember that it's not a zero-sum game. We can win, the startups can win, and in all cases, Canada wins.
You referenced just the sheer size of the big five. Do you worry about that in the market, in the stock market for sure, but just in the market, there are a few dominant players?
Well, you're using the word dominant. I'm going to use the word big.
You are one careful dude.
In the bigness department, the argument in favor of the scale of the businesses that are being built is that you're seeing a once-in-a-lifetime transition to a digital world. And that there are many companies, of which ours is one, but there are many companies that can do very well. So today, many people link the 5 big West Coast companies with the 3 big ones in China. And they omit the many others that are coming up, right? So my suggestion is that Canada should have a goal of having 1 or 2 of those kinds of companies in this next generation of cycles. And by the way, there's always a next generation. There always is.
Sometimes in history, it is determined that there is such a thing as too big. And one could look at Amazon, just by way of example, and say it is they're the Rockefellers, they're Standard Oil, and it needs to be broken into pieces. And there was a time when, in America, that would not have been a politically saleable conversation. It is now.
So you're asking a political question. I would like to answer with a sort of rational answer, and the two don't necessarily mix.
Fair enough.
So I actually studied the Rockefellers, and Amazon did not do and has not done the tactics that the Rockefellers did, right? Okay. So if your statement is true, and it's essentially a political question, it would have to be based on different facts.
Biases.
Well, again, the reasoning would start from facts, but I think all of these things are at some level political at this level. But from my perspective, if I look at Amazon, Amazon has had an enormous effect in bringing high-quality, low-priced goods distributed around the world. And in that sense, they are a natural, they've done in the e-commerce world what Walmart did so successfully 20 years ago, right? So there is a historical analogy for the role that they're playing.
We don't have a ton of time, and I suspect this could be a long answer if we let it be. But what excites you most about where we're going?
So, as I've mentioned, I'm very interested in the AI work, and I want to thank Canada for the contributions you've made. It's pretty clear to me that a lot of major problems in science and mathematics and so forth will now be amenable to AI-based solutions. And the way to understand it is that here you are, and you're a chemist working in a drug company of some kind, and you have an idea in the morning, and you spend all afternoon with your friends, and you try things out in the lab, and at 6 o'clock, nothing works, and you go home, right? Where you sort of kick the dog and you're unhappy, right? Well, instead, I didn't mean to say that about organic chemists, but you get the idea. So at 6 o'clock, imagine that you go home, and as you go home, you suggest to the computer to begin to to read all the papers on this particular question and come back with some new ideas that you haven't seen. Now we're close to being able to do that.
Yeah.
Now, what will happen when that happens? The effect is new drugs that will solve problems that have bedeviled humans for thousands of years. Better food, right? So if you look at the food revolution that's happening, there's just over and over again, the understanding of the brain. So I'm convinced that because of the hard work we've taken to get to this point, we're at the beginning of a next generation of discoveries that are analogous to the industrial age, that they're that powerful. And when they flow through, I want Canada to be clear, I want you to be both developing it as well as beneficiaries of it.
All right, last question. Probably should have been my first one. Where'd you get the socks?
From Al Gore.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Schmidt.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so take care.